Hi, I'm Alan. This is a video. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to more Jump Trash. Over the past couple years, there's been an ongoing discussion whether or not we should get another difficulty. Ever since the demon difficulties were introduced in 2.11, there's always been the discussion of, oh, but the gap between extremes are too big, we need another one. Especially since the difficulty, renaissance of sorts became a thing when bypass especially was introduced. And the easiest extremes and the hardest extremes, the gap is simply too big. So there's always just been a discussion about whether or not we need another one to compensate for the incredibly large gap. And that's what I want to discuss today. I just want to put forth my thoughts and opinions on it, and I want to hear what you guys have to say. So, without further ado, let's just hop into it. But before we start, though, you guys should subscribe. That would be really cool. Anyway, I have a couple of keynotes here on my monitor in front of me to just, point out what I want to discuss. But unlike other discussion videos, I don't want to come from, a neutral stance on this, because I do believe that there is an answer to this question, or I believe there is an answer to this. The reason why I'm putting this video out is because I want you guys to discuss with me and try and figure out and try and convey me and convince me otherwise that there isn't an answer to this. I want to be proven otherwise. So I'm going to be putting forth why I believe that there shouldn't be another difficulty, and you guys in the comment section will try and change my mind. I'm like that one dude who sits behind the thing with the meme image that says blank, change my mind, that thing. Does GD need a difficulty? No, change my mind, that kind of thing. So anyway, the primary thing that makes people think that we should have a new difficulty is the difficulty gap. Cataclysm, Acu, I wasn't about to say phobia. Acu, Cataclysm, the level is in that range, right? That difficulty is significantly easier than something like Slaughterhouse. Or hell, just even the lower list levels like Bash of Vortex or whatever. There's a very popular saying that the gap between Acu and the gap between something like Zodiac, well, it was Zodiac back then, or Bloodlust for that matter, is a bigger gap than Stereo Madness to Acu to begin with. And I would argue that is correct. That is it's just right. It will take you a shorter period of time to go from Stereo Madness to beating Acu than it will go from beating Acu to beating Slaughterhouse a lot of the time, right? So why exactly don't we really need a new difficulty? It won't really change anything. The gap between the easiest of the new difficulty and the hardest of the new difficulty will still be incredibly massive. For a lack of a better explanation, the gap between Acu and Bloodbath is still massive. But if Bloodbath is the cutoff point, Bloodbath to Slaughterhouse is still massive, right? Huge discrepancy in terms of difficulty. And if the cutoff is oh, but what about Artificial Ascent? The gap between Artificial Ascent and Acu is a little smaller than the difficulty gap between Artificial Ascent and Slaughterhouse. So again, it wouldn't really change anything. People just tend to forget that the difficulty gap, or the difficulty of the top 20, is absolutely ridiculous. The hardest levels in this game are so unfathomably difficult that if there is a cutoff, the cutoff will still not really change much. The gap in difficulty will still be way too large to really make any sense. And it wouldn't make sense to make a difficulty for 10 levels. And let's say that we get a new difficulty, but the difficulty is just the top 100. First and foremost, that wouldn't happen regardless, because one, Rob won't endorse the Demons list. It's always going to be a fan-made thing. The Demons list is never going to be officially endorsed by RobTop, because at that point it would just have to hire people. But that's a discussion for a whole different day. But having finite amount of space for a difficulty is also really stupid, because then it comes into the question about objectivity, right? You can't have oh, let's say the top 100 is this new difficulty. That also wouldn't truly make sense, because someone's going to think that number 100 is easier than number 103 or 105 or hell 120. If we go here into the Demons list as it stands right now, number 100 would be Lucid Chaos. Timor is on this list. Sunset Sandstorm, Alter Descent, Dark Flare, Quantum Theory, EXO, so on and so forth. I personally would say that Super Probably level, which is number 104, is much more significantly harder than something like Search Difficult, or Timor, or Sunset Sandstorm, or Airbus. However, Super Probably level with the finite amount of space of 100 levels that can be this new difficulty would not be that new difficulty. It would just not be there. And it would have to constantly be re-rated as things fall off and fall down. But you get the point, right? But the point is that people were always going to disagree with what level should be what. And the fact that stuff like this fluctuates so much would just not make for any reason. There's a reason why stuff like Cataclysm has stayed Extreme Demon the whole way through, is because people just agreed that it is extreme. So even though the difficulty curve gets pushed and things become harder and harder and harder, it still remains the same difficulty. If there's a finite amount of levels that can be a certain difficulty, it would just cause chaos, arguments, it would just not be good. People argue about the rating standards of levels too much to begin with, and people are already up in arms about whether or not Thanatophobia should be Insane Demon or Extreme Demon. And if there was a finite amount of levels that could be Extreme Demon, people would be even more up in arms, because levels that used to be Extreme Demon go down to Insane Demon, and people would be like, oh, but this insert new Insane Demon that used to be Extreme is actually harder than this current Extreme Demon, and I think this is stupid, you know? So having finite amount of space would just not be a good idea. Now that we've talked about that, I do want to talk about a couple of other things that I think are rather important to this discussion. And first and foremost, I think that the most negative thing is that it will just move the bar for when someone is considered a good player. Right now, very popular opinion is that if you don't beat extremes, you aren't good, in quotation marks. I think that's stupid. I think you're good as soon as you can start actively beating demons just in general. But for the sake of the argument, I'm going to present it as if you beat extreme demons, you are good. By removing that bar up, it will set a much higher standard for who's a good player. As I said, the gap between something like Cataclysm and, let's say, the cutoff is like Bloodbath, just for easy comparison, because everyone knows Bloodbath, it would take a lot more for someone to beat Bloodbath than it would to beat Cataclysm, because it's a harder level. It's a much harder level. But if you beat Cataclysm with a new difficulty, and it doesn't actually enter that new difficulty, you wouldn't be considered a good player. I think that's ridiculous. I don't think there's a reason for us to continuously push up the bar for who is a good player and who isn't, and just accept the fact that if you can beat stuff, you are good. But that wouldn't happen. It would create an even bigger gap between the people who are considered good and everyone else. And another point in that like realm of possibility is the fact that when a lot of people refer to themselves, they're like, oh, I haven't even beaten an extreme demon yet. I'm not that great at the game. And I feel like having a much larger jump from like starting in the game to being able to beat the hardest difficulty is also going to make a lot more people feel like they aren't progressing enough. For the next point that I was going to make, which is significant jumps, people already do try and jump from hard demons to medium demons to extreme demons, which, while yes, that is a ridiculous jump, most people just jump to like stuff like Accu, Cataclysm, or levels that aren't like impossibly difficult. They're hard, they require a lot of mechanical skill within the game, but they're not outside the realm of possibility because the levels themselves are lenient enough to where it's not impossible. They're easier levels for people like myself who've beaten a ton of them, but for anyone who's been playing the game for a long enough time to understand the mechanics of the game, they're still manageable while still being ridiculously hard, right? Moving the bar up of the hardest difficulty would just incentivize people to spend even more time on ridiculous jumps that are just not going to be fun, and people already do stuff like that. It's just going to make for a bigger culture in, oh, I gotta skip extreme demons and go straight to insert really dumb name for new difficulty, right? And I'm not a huge fan of that personally. I don't really like that kind of mentality. I've never encouraged jumping, but I understand it in a sense, right? But if we get a new difficulty and the cutoff is much higher in terms of like what the easiest of that difficulty is, there's gonna be a lot of people going straight for that difficulty, and it's not gonna be worth it. I can already see people being like, oh, I'm gonna jump from 9 circles to Artificial Ascent because that's the cutoff for the next difficulty. Haha. I know someone did 9 circles to Firework. You don't have to tell me. I'm aware. Doesn't really change my argument though. And truthfully, the kind of like mentality we already have surrounding extreme demons, I think just in general would become a lot more toxic if we do get another difficulty. The culture we have surrounding extreme demons and the fact that you have to beat extreme demons to be good, you have to do extreme demons. If you want to be a player, you need to do extreme demons. We already look down on star grinders because they don't beat a lot of extreme demons, because why would they? They want stars, they don't want flex points for beating a hard level. We already have such a toxic culture surrounding that ideology as is, making that an even more elite group of people being able to beat the hardest difficulty would just not be healthy for the community as a whole. And I think that trying to combat that kind of like toxic mentality that we already have surrounding these levels and this difficulty is not going to be helped if we decide to make a new difficulty. And let's be real, can you really think of a good name for it that's not like awful? Extreme is already like the peak of the thing. Like extreme sports, what's above extreme sports? Nothing, you know, exactly. But I digress. Besides the point. So I don't really think that we have any good reasons for it. And to make everything like go full circle, right? The whole reason to begin with that we had this discussion, and the reason why this always gets brought up is, oh, but the gap between the hardest and easiest is way too big to begin with, right? Accu to Slaughterhouse is a massive jump, but they're the same difficulty. I beat one extreme demon. Oh, was it Accu? Was it Slaughterhouse? Which one was it? Doesn't really matter. It's an extreme, but there's a big difference in difficulty. People wouldn't stop complaining complaining about the difficulty difference anyway. If you make it the top 150, again, as I said earlier, finite space, not good. But it's not like people stop complaining about it. What's number 150 now? Sinister Incision and Distraught and Base Cave are the 3 lowest levels on the list currently. They are so much easier than Slaughterhouse, Equipment Circles, and Firework. It's not even funny. People wouldn't stop complaining about the difficulty difference anyway. It would just be a repetition of history every single time. Like, we would get a new difficulty over and over and over again until there's like a 1 difficulty per level, right? It just wouldn't work. It wouldn't solve the problem. It would prolong the problem, make it repeat itself in a couple months from now, and then we would just repeat it over and over again. And the only thing we got out of it was an unnecessary difficulty that does nothing. But anyway, tangent over. I really want to hear what you guys have to think about this and what you guys have to say. I know I'm very negative towards the idea of a new difficulty, but that's because I think there's a lot more to it than just, oh, we want a bigger split. Like, if we're thinking about like difficulty in terms of, oh, there's too many extreme demons now, there really isn't. The extreme is like the difficulty with the least amount of levels. There's more insane demons, there's more hard demons, medium demons, easy demons, right? Extreme demons is the difficulty that we have the least of, and we still complain about there being too many of them. So it's not like there's too many extreme demons, it's just that we hear more about extreme demons because that's the highest difficulty. So essentially what would happen is that the cutoff, you would just stop hearing about the extreme demons and hear about the next difficulty instead. So it wouldn't really change anything. I can't see a logical reason why we should add a new difficulty without causing more problems than we already have. So anyway, tell me what you guys think. Sorry if this video is a little bit negatively loaded. I've just been thinking about this for a really long time because I keep getting asked about whether or not I think there should be a new difficulty, and I keep seeing people being like, oh, new difficulty, that would be so epic. So I've just been thinking about it a lot recently. So hopefully a lot of the things that I said made sense and you guys agree with me to an extent. If you don't, please tell me why. Please give me a reason as to why not. I would really like to hear. But anyway, see you guys around. Eat your greens, stay healthy, stay hydrated, and I'll see you guys probably later. Peace out.